Hello and welcome back. So till now we've been making use of inbuilt functions in C, for instance like the scanf function or the printf function or the int main function, and then we've been using them to do certain things. But then what if we'd want to define our own user defined function, or we would want to use our own functions? Let's say we want to write a function that would probably print a matrix for us, or write a function that would output or perform some tasks repetitively for us, or perform a function that would represent a mathematical function. How can we do that in C? So in this video we'll be looking at that. Now to do that, all we have to do first, we have to go to our terminal and then create our C file. So vim and then functions, right? Functions dot C, right? So we include our standard input output dot h, that's the header, and then our int main function, right? Now to define our function, right, there are two ways of doing it. Either we choose to build a function on top before the int main function, or we build it beneath the int main function, right? Regardless, the difference is that if you build it on top of the int main function, you wouldn't have to define or use any function prototype, right? But then if you build it beneath it, you would have to define or call the function prototype here. You would see what I mean by the function prototype person. But then to build our own user defined function, we would have to first, the pattern looks like this. We first have to give it the data type, right? The data type that the function would return, right? So would the function return an integer, would it return a float, or it will return nothing? So if your function is meant to return nothing, let's say your function is just responsible for printing something to screen, obviously it's not going to return anything, it will just print. So that one you would use you use the void, right? So once you specify your data type, then you give a function name, right? So function name that you want, and then inside the parentheses you put your variables that your function will need, right? These parameters or arguments that your function can take. And these parameters or these arguments, you first have to declare their data type as well. So you do data type, and let's say arg1, right? And then data type arg2. So arg2, where the argument is maybe any parameter you want to give your function. When you are done with the number of parameters or the parameters you want your function to use, then you would now input your chunk of code here, the statements you want your function to perform. You would now put them here. So let's say statements. So you will now put your statements here for your function to run. So basically this is how a function looks like. Now if you are returning a value, if your function is returning a value, then you could also decide to return what, let's say a particular value, right? But note that a function in C can only return one value at a time, right? So you could only return one value at a time, unless of course you are using pointers. So if you want to return multiple values in your function, then you would have to work around it using pointers. So pointers can help you to return more values. But then out of the box, functions in C or user defined functions are allowed to return only one value, and that's for the data type. That's because of this data type here. So basically that's that. And then the prototype, the function prototype would also look of this form or like this. So you first give it your data type, which is the same as the one now here, and then you give it a func name as well, and then the argument just as you place them here. So D type, then arg1, right, and then D type arg2. So you have that, and then you terminate it with your semicolon. So basically that's it. That's how your function prototype should run. You would need to declare all the function prototypes or all the functions you would have in your program before you call the function. So in order to call this function or use the function in your main file, all you have to do is just call the name of the function, let's say func name, right, func name, and then provide it with the argument. So let's say arg1 value, right, so arg1 val, let's call the arg1 value, and then arg2 value, right, so arg2 value, and then you are done, and then your function would perform just as you want it for you in your main or in .main function. The reason why we prefer putting our function or typing our function at the bottom, right, of the main function is that the int main function contains the main code, the main chunk of code that we need or that would be using. So if we don't put the functions beneath it, you would have to be scroll down to see or to get access to the main code that we are running. So it's best you put your functions beneath, so that should you need to edit or do something to your function, then you can go down there to edit it. So now let's look at an example. So you want to create a function that would take creating a function that will return, right, return the square of any number. So the square of any number. So let's say integer. Let's just limit it to integers. So you can decide to do it for floats as well, but we would just be limiting our function to integers. So first, since we say our function will return, definitely the square of any integer is an integer, so our function would have to return the int, right, and then we'll call it, let's call it sqr. Sqr. This is the name of our function, right, and then we give it what, so the data types, we just want one integer value, right, so we can call this let's say num for number. So and then we use our function curly braces, and then we inside it we said we want to return, right, so we want to return what, num star num, right, the square of num. So num star num, that's what we want to return, and then we end this line. So we can just go up here. Bear in mind, after declaring our function, we would have to do what, mention it here as in declare our function prototype. So here our function was called what, it was returning an integer, so int, and then we called it sqr, right, and then the parameters or the argument is receiving is an integer called num, right, so we terminate it. So this is our function prototype that we've declared here. Now let's see how well our function can perform. So we want to call our function, right, and then since it's returning an integer, we want to declare a variable, right, so maybe let's declare another variable that will receive that integer. So let's call that variable result, right, result, and then we say that result is equal to what, we are assigning it. So the equal to doesn't mean the equality, but then it means assignment. So the result is equal to, let's say so now we are calling the function. So our function is called sqr. So sqr of what, let's just return the square root of 2 and see something. So sqr2, and then let's print result. So printf result to screen. It's an integer, so percentage d and then comma result. basically that's that. Let's terminate it. Try saving and running our code. Okay, so we've saved it. Let's compile and run. Sorry, this should be gcc, right? function.c, then we want the output to be in function.ox. sorry, then once we hit enter, we don't have any errors, which means that we follow the rules, the laydown rules. And then let's see whether we can get our answer. So /func.x, we hit enter. Yes, we've seen the 4 here. It's not showing problem. Come on, let me add a new line here so we can see our output properly. So we have so we recompile, and then yes, so it has returned the square root of 2. Interesting. So let's give it another number and see. So square root of, let's say 36. I don't know the square root of 36. Not the square root, sorry, the square. 36 squared. So let's see, not square root, sorry, so sorry. So let's see, let's recompile and then run. Interesting. 1296. That's nice. So our code works fine, or the function we've created has worked awesome. So now we can then decide to remodify this code, give it, let's say, declare another variable here called maybe number. Okay, now bear in mind this number is going to be different from the one we declared in the function, right? So the values you declare in the function stay in the function. So if you'd want to use a value that you use in a function outside the function, then you would have to probably declare that value generally, and you would have to do certain things for that particular variable. But for now, any value you declare in your function remains in the function. Any variable, sorry, you declare in your function remains in your function. So imagine we want another integer variable called number, right? And then this time around we are taking the number from the user. So you can just decide to scanf, right? And then so first print that print f, and then receive a number from a user. So enter a number, right? Enter a number, and then we wait for that number, then we add our scanf to get the number from the user, right? So the number is an integer, so we use percentage, this percentage symbol d, and then comma, and then take that number. So we assign it to the address of number, so that's number, right? Then we enter that line. So now that we have the variable, now we could still decide to print, right, assign our result, or print f what of that straightforward. So the square of the number, the square, okay, let's do the square of the number, right? Percent d is percent d, right? So we want it to go to a new line and then comma. So the first number, the number you've given, so let's give it number, right? It's an integer. And then the next one, the answer, this time around we want to pass the function straightforward here, so sqr, right? And then of what? Number. Exactly, you guessed right. So once you have that, you see that we have what? So let's save it and see how our results would be. Okay, there's no error. Interesting. You have to enter a number, 101. I like 101. I don't know why. Interesting. So the square of the number 101 is what? 10,201. So basically that's how to declare functions, right? So now we've declared a function that returns a number. But then what if we want a function that will print but will not return anything? So that one we use a void, right? But then the function name, so which function name? So I want the function to basically print out any string you give it, right? So it should print any string you give it to string. So let's see how that will work. So let's say void, and then let's call this string, right? Print. Okay, string is not a keyword in C, so you can still use it, right? And then now we want this is going to take anything you give it. So let's say you give it an integer, right? So you give it an integer, and then it takes this integer and then decides to do what? So anything, which name should I even give it? Num. No, I can't use num again. Let's use number, integer, so number. Okay, and then this we just call a printf function here, and that will be all. Or better still, we could give it printf of what? The number. Or we can use the what? F puts, right? F puts of the number, right? We said that the f puts function takes what? The f puts function takes the name of the variable you want, so that's number, right? And then where you want to print it to, so that's std. If you don't know of this, go back and check the second video on the string. So std out, right? Now that's the standard output, that's the screen, so you want that. But then we are the output we are giving it is the number variable. So let's make this number a character. Okay, that's what we should have done, character, right? And then we said that this number should receive how many variables. So let's give it let's say a name of a person, name, right? And then 20, let's give it that way. And then yeah, so we go back there, right? And then give our function prototype, right? So our function prototype here would now look like this. So we are returning void, so to be void we are not returning anything, right? And then we are, a function name was called string, and then it takes in a character, right? And this character has what? The character's name was name, and then this name takes 20 elements, or 20 letters or something. So yeah, so this is how our function prototype would look like. And then now inside our main function, right, we could just come here and use the function. So we want it to, so we can just decide to say string, right? String, and then hello world, I guess, or hello world, right? And then let's see what happens. We save and then run this code to see. Whoa, there's an error. Number, yeah, sorry, change this from number to name, so we have to rechange this to name, right? And then see what happens. Okay, we save. and then let's first clear, and then GCC. Interesting, there's no error. So let's see, let's call our function, enter a number 14. Okay, the first code is still working, and then now look, hello world has been printed for us nicely here. Interesting. So here we see that our string function works, right? It takes so you could decide to add a new line here, so that after printing it, it goes to a new line. So print f new line, right? New line. So that after calling the function, it automatically goes to a new line, so we don't have to be typing new lines always or all the time. So you can do that. Let's save this and then go back and see. I think we should have named our function greetings so that it will greet us hello world. So give it a number. Okay, so now you see that hello world, and then it has moved to a new line. So basically this is how we deal with functions. You can decide to write a function or create a function that would return an integer, float, anything, or you could also decide to create a function that returns nothing but rather print something. Maybe printing matrices are very daunting, so you just want to write a function called matrix print and then put all the files, the code for printing a matrix, and then the argument you take would be the matrix, and then you print it out nicely. So basically that's how we do it, and thank you for joining us in this section. Please, if you find this video useful, please like, subscribe, and then share with your mates so that they could also benefit from you. Thank you.